chapter 6 today. I just want to make sure that you guys know what we review for the chapter will be entirely up to you guys. I know we talked about that the first day. I know some chapters are a little bit harder than others. I know kind of as we start going forward here in these next chapters, they're all going to be more about the driving application than just looking at some of the basics of the vehicle. We started off with, the highway transportation system and, the basics of driving in that introductory chapter. And then we started looking at the pre-checks, walking around the vehicle, checking inside the vehicle, all that. We looked at identification of parts of the vehicle. We looked at traffic signs and all that. And now we start getting into the actual driving process. So for those of you that have been driving, it might be a little bit easier because you can read and then understand what they're talking about because you've actually done those things. Whereas for those that aren't as familiar with driving, it can be a lot more difficult to read it and then understand what they're talking about. So as we get into this, it's really going to be important to make sure that you ask questions if you don't understand what the intended portion of the reading they're trying to explain to you. So like I said on Friday, there's no such thing as dumb questions because everyone has a completely different level of understanding when it comes to driving. Some have been driving for a long time. Others have yet to get behind the wheel because they're waiting to get their permit. Whereas others might be waiting to get their permit because they're 13 but their parents have had them driving behind the wheel for quite a while. So even just getting their permit is just going to be a formality that they can now finally legally get behind the wheel. So the important thing is to make sure that you understand what the book is trying to say, because the book may have something as a phrase in there and then that makes sense, but then when they ask a question on the test, it's not, oh, well, if I remember reading this from the book, this is what it says, but that's not going to answer the question. It's going to help answer the question. So with that in mind, they're more application. So they may change something up and it's still the same thing, but you have to think about the answer. But again, that's why I always have you read through each multiple choice answer, make sure you understand the question, and then choose the best answer that applies to what they're looking for. Because I think by now you can probably figure out that, some of the questions in there are not just straightforward word for word from the book. Because the driving course is an application course. It's not just how well can I answer questions on a test. It's understanding the concepts. Because one of the things that you did when you signed for your permit, if you've gotten it, is you signed a lot more than just a pad that goes on to your driver's license. There's a lot more that goes into it that you need to make sure that you understand. And one of them is that you understand that you are capable of operating a vehicle and that you understand the rules of the road. So that's why this portion is so important to make sure that you ask. Because again, odds are if you ask, there's someone else in the classroom that probably has that same question, or maybe got clarification that they didn't think they needed before, but actually needed. So please make sure we ask questions, because that will help better prepare you for the test. Because again, I'll explain anything you want, but I mean, as some of you have found out when you ask questions, I'll tell you whether or not it's going to be on the test. I mean, I'm willing to help you out, but like I said, the discussions that we have are totally up to you. So I feel like if we have very little discussion, that just tells me that all of you are prepared. If we have more discussion, then that tells me that you have a lot of questions on the information that you got. So I will help you in any way that I can, but you guys got to meet me halfway. And again, all you got to do is just ask the question. Again, if you're afraid to ask the question because you feel like, oh, people think I'm going to be dumb, this is perfect in here because, you know, you can send me a private message on Zoom and I'll read it and I'll go over it. I'll just read what the question is and I'll answer it. So it doesn't have to be where I'm announcing your name on Zoom. So hopefully that makes sense and hopefully you understand it. But again, there are no such thing as dumb questions. And even if it's something that doesn't directly apply to this chapter, if it applies to driver's education, this is why you're here. All right. So with that, what do you got? Chapter 6. I'm just going to grab my book out.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Peyton.
So last night when I was doing this, is there a difference between DWI and DUI because they're like the same thing, but like then they use two different terms? Like,
yeah, and honestly, there is a third term in there too. It just depends on the state and how they handle things. It's called OWI. So you have DWI, driving while intoxicated, and you have OWI, which is operating while intoxicated. So sometimes they're used interchangeably, but in the reality of it, obviously they're both bad. Being under the influence of alcohol and or drugs is not a good situation. But obviously DUI refers to driving under the influence, whereas OWI is operating while intoxicated. So let me look here. Okay. Yeah. So all of those are just how they name it. But the federal law is 0.08 for anyone 21 and over. For you guys, that doesn't apply to you. And why is that? Go ahead, Peyton.
guys, you can't drink, period.
You're not 21. It's 0.08 for me. It's 0.01 for you, or what they would consider to be no tolerance. Now, why 0.01? They have 0.01 for a couple of different reasons. Again, normally I try to get kids to think about this, but since we're on a shorter time frame, I'll just tell you. So you're getting ready to go to school and you wash out your mouth with mouthwash. Mouthwash has alcohol in it. So there's a possibility that if you took a breathalyzer, it may show up. Also, in the event that you are coming home from church services and you partake in communion, well, if you drink wine, that can show up in your system. But so they say zero tolerance with 0.01 for those minor exceptions, which again isn't anything that should affect your driving ability whatsoever. But anything more than that could land you. I mean, you could take a breathalyzer and you could, blow a 0.04 or something like that, which means you're well below the limit, but you can be charged just because you're not 21. So with that, that's just what they call it, driving under the influence, or DWI. The idea is when you're 21 and over, the magic number is 0.08. But the biggest thing is just have a plan. If I say this in general, and obviously I'm not condoning drinking. I'm definitely not condoning underage drinking. But what I am saying is, if you find yourself in a bad situation, don't make the situation worse. So if you happen to be underage and you found yourself that you've been drinking, two wrongs don't make a right. So don't try to drive home or get in your vehicle and drive. Don't get in with anyone who's been driving. Just make sure you have a backup plan. Make sure somebody is there to get you home safely. Or if you've got to stay where you're at, if you're outside of your home, always have a plan. I know that's kind of a tangent from that, but I know that's kind of the long answer to your brief question, but the short answer is they use different names for it, but the idea is 0.08 or more is what can land you a DUI or a DWI. Yep, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, so then it says commercial drivers is considered a DUI at a BAC of 0.04.
Mm-hmm.
Who is that, like business trucks or like?
Yeah, mostly people that have a CDL, which is a commercial driver's license. So yeah, your semi drivers, basically anyone that I guess drives for a living. I think like UPS drivers and FedEx drivers would follow under that category as well. I fall under that category as well. So anyone that holds a CDL isn't allowed to drive with more than a 0.04. It's a stricter deal. And obviously, if they were doing that while they were working, that would probably be, an immediate termination of their job. So, yeah, they take that stuff really serious. My job also falls under that as well. The only reason why I'm able to be a driver's ed teacher is because I don't have any alcohol offenses on my driving record. If I got a DUI, I would not be allowed to teach this class. If I had gotten a DUI before I became a teacher, so let's say I was 21 years old and I got a DUI, I couldn't be a teacher for driver's ed. Like that is a requirement. They do a background check when you do that. So you can't have anything prior. And if I did get one now, I would automatically be fired as a driver's ed instructor because the state would revoke that portion of my certificate. So that's automatic. But it's not like that's what keeps me from drinking and driving. The idea of just being smart and making good choices is what prevents me from doing that. Plus all the fines and possible getting arrested or jail time, or even the idea of possibly hurting somebody is what keeps me from doing that. All right, what else you got?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on pages like 118 to 125, on all the pictures and like diagrams that they're using and stuff, there's little stars on some of the cars, and like some of there's some lines behind the cars, and they're like different colors and stuff. I just don't know what they mean.
Okay. Yeah, good question. So the stars, the red stars in the back just means that they are stopped. Because again, if you look at the picture, obviously you can tell what the yellow arrows are, right? I mean, that's easy. That's the direction that they're traveling. But actually the yellow arrows doesn't necessarily mean that. It actually means that the direction that they're intending to travel. So if you look, I'm on 120 right now, and I'm looking at that top left picture right here. Okay. So what I'm looking at is there's red stars in the back. That just means that they have their brakes on, which means they're currently stopped. And then there are two yellow stars on the left side. That just indicates that they have their turn signal on, so that they're intending to turn, and they are communicating with the other car that they're intending to turn. What the red dash lines, that indicates that the car is slowing down. So the red just means they're slowing down, they're braking. And in this case, it's for open intersections, they're yielding the right of way because they're slowing down and letting the other vehicle go. So quick answer on that one. The dashes just mean braking, and the stars mean lights on the car. So red is brake lights, yellow is turn signal lights. So hopefully that should help you kind of better identify what's going on in those pictures. So with that question, I'll help you answer one of the questions that will be on the test. And more importantly, when you get to intersections, when you are driving. This is something that, you know, for those of you who haven't finished your logs yet, can look at this as well. easy way to remember at a place like four-way stops, which is what they look at a little bit on page 120. And I know it's not ideal. They do have one picture of a four-way stop. Easy way to remember is, and I get this question a lot, is, well, if you have this car here and this car here, who has the right of way? So a couple things to remember. The first one should be the easiest to remember. So they call it the right of way. So if you have vehicles, if you're at an intersection and you have a car either to the left or you have a car to the right, you just need to remember what that phrase is. Okay, it is called the right of way. So let's say I'm going to go back to 120. So that top right-hand picture right here. So you have the green car, the black car, and the red car right here. I'm going to look at the green car and the red car. So if you were in the red car, I'm only going to focus on those two. I'm not going to worry about the black car. So the red car has a car to the right of them. Okay. If you have a car to the right of you, they have the right of way. Okay. Just an easy way to remember that. So in the green car's case, they have a car to the left of them. So if you have a car to the left of you, that means you are to the right of them, which means you are the one that has the right of way. So that typically works if you and another car approach the intersection at about the same time. Typically, vehicles to the right always have the right of way. If it's somebody adjacent to you or next to you on the other street. If you have vehicles that are across from you, so in that same situation, you have the black car and the red car. Then it depends on what are you doing. If you are looking to cross traffic, then the other person usually will have the right of way if you approach near the same time. If you are not approaching traffic, if you are not crossing traffic, then you will usually have the right of way. So there would be another scenario where, going back to that same picture here, this car was going straight. What if this car was going straight? Who has the right of way then? Go ahead, Peyton.
Is the green car not in the picture in this one?
Correct. I'm just looking at the black car and the red car.
Okay, so they both have the right of way because they're not going to run into each other?
Yeah, they both have the right of way because neither one of them are going to conflict with each other in the intersection. Let's say both of those vehicles were turning right. Again, they both would have the right of way because neither one of them is going to interfere with the other. So if you are not crossing traffic, which in this case would just be any left turn, and the other vehicle is not crossing traffic by making a left turn, then they both have the right of way. Same goes in that situation. If they were both turning left, they're both crossing traffic, but neither one is going to cross each other because one will go like this and the other will go like this. So in a way, you have, if I can get both my fingers in here, they're both turning left and will not cross each other, so they can go at the same time. So that's another reason why communicating, excuse me, is so important. And the number one way to communicate is use your turn signals. I headed out of town this weekend. And it's amazing how much frustration driving can cause when people don't communicate. And makes it so much easier when people do communicate and communicate early to let you know what their intentions are. So I will tell you, to be a good driver, you need to be a predictable driver. If you're going to turn left, you need to make sure that you signal before you start moving. Because normal drivers don't like unpredictable drivers. And again, that's something that you can observe when you're a passenger or when you're a driver. If you see somebody putting on their turn signal, you should be able to identify where they're going to turn. Or some of the behaviors that they make, you should be able to identify what they're doing. Because that makes a predictable driver, which also makes you a safe driver. Yep, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, so let's say that like we're on an intersection and like everyone comes at the same time. So like I know like if whoever come first would go first, but like let's say they all come at like the exact same time. Okay. Everyone has a right to them. So which vehicle, like every vehicle is going to have a vehicle that's to its right, so that they have, but which vehicle will go first because they all have someone right to them?
Good question. The answer to that is, I don't know. So the first thing I would say, and you don't have to answer this, but the first thing that I would say is, what are they doing? Are they turning? Are they going straight? Are they turning right? Are they turning left? I mean, there's only three options that you have: turn right, turn left, or go straight. So here's the thing. The reason why I said you don't have to answer that is because there's a lot of different situations, because each car has three options. So let me pull something up here real quick. Back on Zoom here. All right, so can everyone see the intersection? Can you see that, Peyton? Okay, so I know this is a little bit more complicated of an intersection, but let me see if I can find a better one. Preferably one without. Well, I want that one. Okay, so again, not the, no, I don't like that one. Thought that'd be a good one, but all right, let's just go with something basic like this. Okay, so four-way stop. We're not going to worry about the two vehicles that are there. We can just assume that there is another vehicle here and another vehicle here. So again, the big thing is just depends on what they're doing. So a couple of general scenarios. So the important thing is you will have the right of way when someone gives you the right of way. Okay, plain and simple. This is why nonverbal cues work really well. There might be a situation where you get to an intersection and you technically don't have the right of way, but then somebody else gives you the right of way. Just with a nonverbal of, you know, go ahead, go. So it's important to watch other drivers in the event that they give you the right of way. So let's say you have a vehicle here, these two vehicles are here, and let's say all four vehicles just want to drive straight. Nobody wants to turn. Okay, so then it just depends because, yeah, each one has a vehicle to the left where they have the right of way, but each vehicle has one to the right, which means they don't have the right of way. So in that situation, somebody just needs to make a move. So let's say it's this car here that decides to go. So if this car goes straight here, the car that's here better go straight as well. Okay, so that means these two cars will have the right of way. Then after that, when they clear the lane, then this car here and the car that's over here will have the right of way. You know, or the situation can be exactly the same, only it reverses. This car decides to go, which means this car goes, this car better go. And then this car goes, this car goes. The only situation that would happen if every car had the right of way and every car could go at the same time is if all four cars at the intersection were turning right and not crossing traffic. So in another situation, if every car was turning left, you know, same thing. This car could go at the same time. Then this car could go and this car could go at the same time. So it kind of all depends. And there are a lot of different situations that can happen in intersections. That's why it's important to identify when you get there, who is the one that should have the right of way. And even when you get there, it could be you. So the important thing is know who has it and be ready to go when it's your turn, or be ready to go if somebody just gives you the right of way. So does that kind of help? Okay. And like I said, there's a lot of different variations and a lot of different situations, but that's one of the main reasons for right of way is when it is given for you. You don't take the right of way is given to you. All right, what else do you guys got?
Okay, I have one more thing.
Sure.
What does it mean? I might like butcher the name, but when it says willful and wanton, I don't know what wanton. I don't know.
Where are you at?
Well, it's on my notes, but
Okay.
it says it somewhere in the back. Page 133 on the bottom.
Okay. Okay, so talking about like reckless driving, willful and wanton. Um, so the idea of reckless driving, which good question, that'll be on your test. That basically reckless driving is something that you are intentionally doing. So for example, if you're going 5 miles over the speed limit, what are you doing? Oh, come on, 32 people in here.
Being a
Cheating.
Say again?
being a reckless driver.
Going 5 miles over the speed limit?
Oh,
Speeding.
Yeah, you're speeding. Okay. Now, Jordan, going 25 miles an hour over the speed limit. Are you just speeding or is it something more like reckless?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to know that, you know, just because you go over the speed limit, some of you may think, well, I'll just get a speeding ticket. There are times where speeding can result in careless or reckless driving. Because you're just, I mean, if you're going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, you know, there isn't a good reason for that. You know, it's intentional. You know, you can't really say, oh, I didn't realize I was going that fast. Because let's think 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. On the interstate in South Dakota, that's 100. Okay. So now let's take the complete opposite of that. In a school zone. In a school zone on non-school hours, that's 45 miles an hour. When school's in session, that's 35. I mean, yeah, 35 is a more reasonable speed to drive, but when you're in a school zone, that's, to me, that's willful, that you are not paying attention and not caring about the speed limit. So yeah, that's the biggest thing is willful and wanton. So basically what they're saying is you are willing to do things reckless and you are wanting to do things reckless. And again, it's you are disregarding the safety for yourself. You're disregarding the safety for passengers if you have them, and disregarding safety of other vehicles on the road. That's basically what that means. Willful is the will to commit this, and wanton is basically just another version of, you know, you're wanting to do this. Mm-hmm. Question or? Okay. All right. Anyone else?
What does it mean to exercise due care?
Exercise due care. Is that, I'm assuming that's in the same area? Is that in the same area as the aggressive and reckless driving?
I think so. I think it's on page 100. 132. I think. It's on page 128, first paragraph.
Okay. Okay. So, exercising due care is basically what that's saying is even if somebody else makes a mistake, that may not be a good enough reason for you to be not at fault or somewhat liable if there's an accident. So in a situation where if a car pulls out in the intersection and you clearly have the right of way, if you collide with that other person, it will still come back, not necessarily on you, but it'll come back to you and say, well, did you see them pull out in front of you? What did you do to try and avoid that? And if you didn't do anything to try and avoid that, then you may shoulder some of that responsibility. Even though they broke the law, you could still be held liable if you don't practice due care. And again, most people would think, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to get into an accident because I don't want my vehicle damaged. It's a lot more of a hassle when you have to have your vehicle fixed. Whereas others are, well, you know what? I don't really care about my car. And, oh, this is a great way. I've got a dent in my front bumper. This will be a great way to get that fixed for free, and I won't have to pay for it. I say that because there are people out there that do that. And obviously it's not morally right, but that's why they have drivers needing to exercise due care, because if there's a situation where an accident occur, it's did you do everything in reason to try and avoid that? And if you couldn't avoid that, then you did at least exercise due care. So that's really what that means. All right, what else?
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on page 123, it talks about emergency vehicles, and when when they're behind you, you need to pull off to the right side and stop. Why is it on both sides of the road?
Emergency vehicles basically have the right to not have to obey all laws. They are still required to follow laws in regards to other drivers, because obviously in a manner that they drive is not normally safe for anybody else. Individuals who drive emergency vehicles have to go through a lot more training to be able to do what they do. But the idea is what they do can be very unpredictable. Couple of reasons for that. Number one, they don't have to stop at all the stop signs. They don't have to stop at all the stop lights. And they don't have to follow speed regulations. So with that in mind, if there is an emergency vehicle approaching behind you, it's important to move over to the side of the road and to stay stopped until they pass you. And again, I was in a similar situation where I was at a stoplight and an emergency vehicle came up and there were cars to the right. So I couldn't pull over to the right. So what I did was I just stayed there. And the emergency vehicle went into the turning lane because the turning lane was open and went through the red light. So the idea is for me not to break the law because they have the right to be able to do that. Now, if it was a situation where there were cars to my right and there was a car in the turning lane, then it might have been better for me if I were to try and pull off to the right if I could. But sometimes that's not always the best situation because if they're going to make that right turn. So now getting back into your answer is you make every effort if the car is approaching, if the vehicle is approaching behind you to get off to the right side of the road. But then other vehicles will, if a emergency vehicle is coming from the other direction, it's always important to pull over to the right side of the road in the event that they ever needed to do something on your side of the road. I've never had that happen, but the idea is you just move off to the side of the road in either direction out of respect to getting, emergency personnel where they need to go. And typically if I'm on the other side of the road, I don't ever pull over completely and stop, but I always move my vehicle to the right-hand lane and I slow down until they pass and then I proceed. But I don't think most of the time it'll ever be a situation where it'll really affect you. But just being in that habit and being mindful of that is just a good habit to be in. Yeah, go ahead, Peyton.
Okay, so let's say you have like two lanes and they're both going like the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were on, like, I don't know if they would do this, but like let's say you're like on like the leftmost lane and they're coming from behind you. Do you, like, I know you're supposed to pull over to the right, but if you're on the leftmost lane, are you pulling over to the left, or like if they're coming from behind you?
If they're coming from behind you, what the correct thing to do is move over to the right-hand lane and stop if you can. If it's a situation where they are driving in the right-hand lane and coming up behind you, if you have that situational awareness where you can see behind you and say maybe other vehicles are slowing down and stopping on the left side and they're driving on the right side, then I would say just do that. But otherwise, if you can, the idea is pull over to the right and stop. That's usually the normal routine of doing that. But again, if that were the situation where you were on the left side and you see like an ambulance or a fire truck coming up on the right side, then stop on the left side to let them know that, hey, you could just keep going down the right-hand lane. But normal situation, immediately when you hear or see lights or sirens, you just move over to the right and stop, because the first thing you should do is, if you hear it, move over to the right and stop, and then look to see where is that coming from, just to ensure that it's not behind you. All right, what else do you guys got? Good questions today. And maybe it was just the fact that you had all weekend to put some together.
All right, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for funeral processions, do they not have to obey the stop signs, or because like if they're all in one line, like what happens there?
Now, as far as laws go, they are an exception. And again, it's just out of respect. But typically there are guidelines for what they do. I've been in funeral processions where you do go through red lights, you do go through stop signs, but you also usually indicate that you are part of the funeral procession. So not necessarily as much now because a lot of vehicles have day runners, they have lights on during the day, but you're always supposed to have your lights turned on to show that you are different from the other traffic, and usually having your hazard lights on to show that you are part of that. And typically the funeral homes vehicles, the hearse and everything usually lead, and then everyone else usually follows. So if you are on the other end of that and you do see a funeral procession, please make sure you show that respect for those individuals following the funeral procession, and just wait, be patient, let those vehicles go, and then you can proceed and go. All right, what else do you guys got? Well, if not, let's go ahead and turn on your cameras and let's see some notes. I believe we are starting with 3. So find 3 and hold them up. All right, good. 4, hold them up. 5. Six. All right. So any last questions?
When you went, wow.
I assume that wasn't a question, Cooper. All right. So with that, go ahead and get into chapter 6. It should be available to you. If not, just let me know. Again, I scheduled it to open at 7:15, so it should be open by now. and go ahead and take the test. So if anyone gets in and sees that it's there, just give me a nod that they can find it. Cool. Thanks, Sophie.